That summer, when I was 18, a boy with a reckless grin and eyes that held the chaos of a storm saved me. He mistook me for a girl, and with all the clumsy sincerity a teenager could muster, confessed his feelings over a birthday cake meant for himself. The truth, when I finally forced it from my damaged throat, was a blade. I was a boy too. In a flash of fury and wounded pride, he smashed that beautiful cake into the dirt and vanished from my life. 7 years. 7 years of silence passed before I saw him again, and when I did, he looked through me as if I were nothing more than a ghost. My 18th summer was a season of oppressive silence. I was a late bloomer, stuck in that awkward space between boyhood and manhood where my frame was slight, my features were soft, and my hair brushed just past my ears. Dressed in my uniform of a plain white t-shirt and loose pants, I was an easy mistake to make, an ambiguity I'd grown tired of correcting. But that summer, correction wasn't an option. A severe infection had savaged my vocal cords right after the grueling college entrance exams, and my doctor had sentenced me to 2 months of absolute silence. No talking, no whispering, no shouting. The world had gone quiet, and I was trapped inside it with only my thoughts for company. It was early July, on an evening so humid the air felt like a heavy, wet towel draped over the city. I was taking my usual shortcut home, a dimly lit alley that snaked between the old apartment buildings in our neighborhood. I'd walked it 1,000 times without incident, the flickering streetlights casting long, dancing shadows on the cracked pavement. But that night, the rhythm of the city felt off. I heard footsteps behind me, not the casual, unhurried pace of a neighbor, but a predatory shuffle that sent a cold prickle of fear up my spine. I risked a glance over my shoulder. A group of them, 5 or 6 guys who looked like they'd styled themselves after a low-budget gangster film, all ripped jeans, cheap chains, and belligerent smirks. They fanned out, deliberately blocking the alley's exit. The one who seemed to be their leader, a guy with a fresh buzz cut and a cigarette hanging loosely from his lips, took a step closer. His voice, when he spoke, was a greasy slick of condescension. "Hey, sweetheart, where you off to in such a hurry?" His friends snickered, a chorus of mean-spirited laughter as they began to close in. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Couldn't scream. I couldn't even manage a hoarse whisper to tell them to back off. My only option was to push, to try and break through their circle. But when I lunged forward, Buzzcut's hand shot out and clamped around my wrist. His grip was vice-like, tight enough to leave a ring of bruises. "What's the rush?" he leered. "Let's get to know each other." His friends hooped, their hands reaching for me, tugging at the fabric of my t-shirt. Panic, raw and clawing, rose in my throat. I shoved back with all my might, but I was outnumbered and outmatched. The walls of the alley seemed to press in, suffocating me. Just as a wave of despair washed over me, a voice, deep and sharp as a whip crack, sliced through the thick, humid air. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The group froze mid-grab, their heads snapping toward the source of the voice. I followed their gaze to a figure standing under the sickly yellow glow of a flickering streetlight. He was tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the light, his hands casually stuffed into the pockets of a worn leather jacket. His hair was a chaotic mess, as if he'd just woken from a deep sleep, but he radiated an energy, a kind of coiled intensity that made the very air around him feel charged. He was the type of person who didn't just look for fights. He looked like he was built to end them. Buzzcut sneered, trying to recover his bravado. "Mind your own damn business, man. The newcomer took a slow step forward, a lazy, dangerous grin playing on his lips. "Funny," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "I was just about to say the same thing to you." There was an unmistakable challenge in his voice, an edge that dared them to make a move. The gang hesitated, their collective confidence wavering as they sized him up. He didn't so much as flinch under their scrutiny, just tilted his head. "So, are we going to dance, or are you going to scram?" It didn't take them long to make a decision. With a string of muttered curses, Buzzcut let go of my wrist, and the entire group retreated, melting back into the shadows like startled insects. I stood there, my knees trembling, gasping for breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My savior turned to me, and the hard lines of his face softened, just a fraction. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his voice losing its sharp edge. "Those jerks didn't hurt you, did they?" I could only manage a shaky nod, my throat burning with the desperate, useless urge to speak, to thank him, to say anything. All I could do was stare. Up close, he was even more striking. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that seemed to capture and reflect the dim streetlight. He looked like trouble, but the kind of trouble that made you feel paradoxically safe. "Where you headed?" he asked, scratching the back of his neck in a gesture that seemed surprisingly boyish. "I'll walk you. No way I'm letting you wander off alone after that." I hesitated for a moment, torn between gratitude and the ingrained wariness of a stranger. But the alley no longer felt like a simple shortcut. It felt like a trap I just narrowly escaped. I gave another small nod. He took my silence in stride, falling into step beside me. "What, you don't talk or something?" He glanced at me, a smirk returning to his face. "You mute or what?" "Cute." My face flushed with heat. I wanted to snap back, to tell him I wasn't mute, just temporarily silenced by a medical condition. But all I could muster was an indignant glare. He let out a low chuckle, clearly amused by my reaction. "Relax. I'm just messing with you. Name's Dennis, by the way. You got a name, little mute?" I opened my mouth out of sheer habit, then closed it again, a fresh wave of frustration washing over me. I pointed to my throat and shook my head emphatically. His brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "For real? You can't talk at all?" I nodded, and he let out a low whistle. "Damn, that's rough. Bet you're dying to tell me to shut up by now." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't stop the corner of my mouth from twitching into a reluctant smile. He had a way about him, a cocky, teasing charm that made it impossible to stay angry. We walked the rest of the way in a comfortable silence, our footsteps echoing on the pavement, accompanied by the distant, droning hum of cicadas. When the alley finally opened onto my brightly lit street, I pointed toward my apartment building, just a few blocks down. "Cool. Not far," Dennis said, shoving his hands back into his jacket pockets. "You live around here?" "Me too. Guess we're neighbors, little mute." That grin was back, and I noticed for the first time how it completely transformed his face, revealing a boyish charm beneath the tough guy exterior. It was dangerously distracting. When we reached the entrance to my building, I turned to him, fumbling for a way to express my gratitude without words. I settled on a short, awkward bow. He just waved it off with a casual flick of his wrist. "Don't sweat it. Just try not to wander down dark alleys alone, yeah? You're way too scrawny to fight off creeps." I shot him another glare, and he laughed again, a sound that was surprisingly warm. All right, I'm going. Stay out of trouble, little mute." He gave me a mock salute before sauntering off, his silhouette slowly swallowed by the night. I watched him go, my heart still pounding in my chest, and I knew it wasn't just from the fear of the alley anymore. Back in the safety of my room, I collapsed onto my bed, the events of the evening replaying in my mind. Dennis. The name echoed in my head, entwined with the image of his grin and the sound of his voice. I had a strange, unshakable feeling that our paths would cross again. And for the first time all summer, the suffocating silence around me didn't feel quite so lonely. The summer dragged on, a relentless wave of heat that made the very air feel thick and heavy. My parents were ghosts in my life, working grueling shifts at a nearby factory, a constant cycle of day and night. My primary responsibility was to deliver their meals, a simple enough task that involved a short walk to the factory gates. But after my encounter in the alley, every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. I found myself constantly scanning the streets, my stomach twisting into knots at the thought of running into those thugs again, completely unable to call for help. And then Dennis reappeared. A few days after he'd rescued me, I was on my way to the factory, lunchbox in hand, when I saw him. He was leaning against a lamppost at the entrance to the alley, casual and cool in a black tank top. His arms crossed over his chest as if he were guarding the place. When our eyes met, he straightened up, that signature grin spreading across his face. "Yo, little mute. Off to play delivery boy?" I blinked, completely taken by surprise. I hadn't expected to see him again so soon, let alone waiting here. I gave a hesitant nod, clutching the lunchbox a little tighter. He fell into step beside me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You're not walking through that alley alone anymore," he declared, pressing a cold popsicle into my hand that he'd bought from the corner store. "Not after those losers tried to mess with you. I'm your bodyguard now. Deal with it." I looked at the strawberry popsicle, my favorite flavor, a detail he couldn't possibly know, and then back at him, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Bodyguard? With his messy hair and scuffed sneakers, he looked more like a roadie for a punk band. But I wasn't about to argue. With him by my side, the alley transformed from a place of fear into just another stretch of pavement. I unwrapped the popsicle, the sweet, icy taste a welcome relief from the oppressive heat. From that day on, it became our routine. Every afternoon, without fail, Dennis would be there, waiting at the mouth of the alley, armed with a popsicle and that infuriatingly charming smirk. He would fill the silence with an endless stream of stories about his life, how he was a freshman at a college across town, how he'd demolished his friends in a game of basketball, how he'd shaved a precious second off his swim time. "You ever swim, little mute?" he asked one day, expertly flicking his empty popsicle stick into a nearby trash can. "Bet you'd sink like a rock." I rolled my eyes in response, which only seemed to amuse him further. "What? I'm just saying. You're kind of delicate." He reached out as if to ruffle my hair, but I dodged his hand, shooting him a glare. Delicate? I wasn't that small. Maybe a little, but still. He just chuckled, completely unfazed. "All right, tough guy, chill." He called me Little Mute every chance he got, the nickname becoming a private joke between us. It had annoyed me at first, a constant reminder of my voicelessness, but over time it started to feel familiar, almost affectionate. Dennis was loud, unapologetically cocky, and possessed absolutely no filter, but there was an undeniable kindness beneath it all. He was genuine. He would wait for me at the factory gate while I dropped off the food, never once complaining about the brutal afternoon sun. One time, he showed up with a fresh Band-Aid stretched across his knuckles, muttering something about a dumb fight with his buddies. I raised a questioning eyebrow and he just grinned. Don't worry, I won. Always do. One evening, as the sky bled into shades of deep violet and the moon began its ascent, Dennis was rambling on about a poker game he'd dominated in his dorm. Cleaned him out, he bragged, his hands stuffed in his pockets. 10 whole bucks, baby. I'm basically a pro. He glanced at me, expecting some kind of impressed reaction, but I simply stopped walking and stared at him, my expression flat. Gambling? Really? He froze, his boastful demeanor deflating instantly. He scratched the back of his neck, a sheepish look on his face. Okay, it was just for fun, he said, his grin turning slightly guilty. Don't give me that look, little mute. It's not like I'm hitting up casinos or anything. I let out a huff of air through my nose and started walking again. He jogged to catch up, leaning in close with a mischievous glint in his eyes. What's that? You worried about me? Huh? My face erupted in heat. Worried? Of course not. I was merely judging his poor life choices. I shook my head vigorously, but Dennis just let out a loud, bright laugh, as if he just won some secret bet with himself. You're too easy to tease, he said, nudging my shoulder playfully. Bet you're blushing under all that hair. I swatted his hand away, my glare intensifying, but there was no denying the fire in my cheeks. Why did he have to say things like that? And why did it make my stomach perform a series of nervous somersaults? I focused my gaze on the cracks in the pavement, trying to ignore the proximity of his body, the way his arm would occasionally brush against mine. The moonlight spilled onto the street, bathing everything in a soft, silvery glow. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though we were the only two people in the world. Dennis never seemed to mind my inability to speak. He effortlessly filled the silence with his stories, his terrible jokes, and his boundless energy. You're a good listener, you know that? He told me one night, handing me another popsicle. Most people would have told me to shut up by now. I smirked, thinking to myself that if I could talk, I probably would have told him to shut up on multiple occasions. But in truth, I didn't mind at all. His voice had become the soundtrack to my summer, a warm and steady presence that chased away the loneliness. By the end of July, the alley was no longer a place I dreaded. Not because it was any less dark or grimy, but because Dennis was always there, transforming a mundane chore into the highlight of my day. I started to notice the little things about him. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. The way he would subconsciously slow his long-legged stride to match my own. The way he always positioned himself on the outside of the sidewalk, closer to the street. It was foolish how much those small gestures began to mean to me. As we reached my building one night, I turned to him, my chest aching with the desire to say something. Anything. As if sensing my internal struggle, he just grinned. See you tomorrow, little mute. Don't dream about me too much. I responded by flipping him off, and his laughter echoed down the street as he walked away. I stood there long after he was gone, the popsicle melting in my hand, wondering why my heart refused to slow its frantic pace. August arrived, heavy and humid, the air thick with the incessant drone of cicadas. The rhythm of my summer was now defined by Dennis. Delivering meals, the alley, a popsicle, his teasing grin. I had grown accustomed to his presence, to the easy comfort of our one-sided conversations. I would never admit it, but those daily walks had become the anchor of my otherwise monotonous days. It was the last week before the start of the new school year, and a palpable tension hung in the air, a sense of impending change. Dennis had been acting strangely, a nervous energy humming beneath his usual cocky exterior. He was fidgety, less talkative, as if he were wrestling with words he couldn't bring himself to say. I caught him staring at me more than once, but whenever I met his gaze with a questioning look, he would just deflect with a quick smirk and change the subject. "What? Got something on your face, little mute?" he'd say, tossing me a popsicle to evade my scrutiny. That evening, the sky was a breathtaking canvas of pink and gold as we made our way back from the factory. Dennis was unusually quiet, his hands buried deep in his pockets, his swagger noticeably absent. I gently nudged him with my elbow, tilting my head in a silent query. "What's up?" He just shook his head, muttering, "Nothing. Just thinking." Thinking? Since when did Dennis think instead of speaking his mind? We reached the alley, the place where we had first met, now stripped of its menace by his constant companionship. Halfway through, he came to an abrupt halt. "Hang on a sec," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "Wait right here." Before I could even process his words, he was jogging toward the corner store at the alley's entrance, its neon sign flickering in the twilight. I stood there, utterly confused, watching as he spoke animatedly with the clerk. He returned a moment later clutching 2 plastic bags, his face illuminated by a nervous, hopeful energy. "All right, so," he began, standing a little too close for comfort. "Today's kind of special." He held up the bag in his left hand, and through the thin plastic, I could see a small, perfect cake, adorned with whipped cream and fresh strawberries. It looked far too delicate for a guy like him. "It's my birthday." I blinked, completely caught off guard. His birthday? Why hadn't he mentioned it? A smile formed on my lips, and I was about to gesture a happy birthday, but he continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I know this is weird timing, okay? I should probably wait for your birthday or something, but I'm not good at waiting." A faint blush colored his cheeks, and he was deliberately avoiding my eyes, a behavior so unlike the confident Dennis I knew. He brought the second bag forward, and my stomach plummeted. It was a bouquet of flowers. Not from a florist, but a messy, vibrant bunch of wildflowers, the kind you pick yourself. "Little mute," he said, his voice dropping to a low, earnest murmur. "I like you. Like, really like you. Will you be my girlfriend?" The world screeched to a halt. My brain short-circuited, caught on that one impossible word. Girlfriend. I stared at him, at his hopeful eyes, at the flowers trembling slightly in his hand, and I felt my heart crack. He thought I was a girl. This entire time, the popsicles, the walks, the bodyguard act, the teasing, it was all built on a massive misunderstanding. He had been falling for someone who didn't even exist. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. Too sudden?" Dennis asked, his smile faltering as he misinterpreted my stunned silence. "I mean, I get it. We're starting college soon, in the same city, so we'll have plenty of time to hang out, get to know each other better. You don't have to say yes right now." He was rambling, his nervousness palpable, and it was breaking my heart. "Just maybe eat some cake with me? For my birthday?" I couldn't let him continue down this path. I had to stop him. I opened my mouth, my throat raw and tight, and forced the words out, a sound that was raspy and painful. "I'm a guy." Dennis froze, the flowers slipping in his grasp. "What?" His voice was sharp, disbelieving. I swallowed against the searing pain in my throat and repeated myself, a little clearer this time. I'm a guy, Dennis, not a girl. He let out a short, shaky laugh. No way. You're messing with me, right, little mute? Come on. I shook my head, a heavy weight settling in my chest. I pointed to myself, mouthing the word guy again, desperate for him to understand. And then his expression shifted. The confusion melted away, replaced first by dawning realization, and then by something much darker. You're serious, he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. I nodded, a wave of guilt so powerful it was nauseating crashing over me. I had never intended to deceive him. I just couldn't speak, couldn't explain. The silence that fell between us was heavy and suffocating. Dennis's jaw clenched tightly. He looked from the cake to the flowers in his hand as if they were poisonous. So this whole time, you just let me think. His voice trailed off, his eyes flashing with a deep, profound hurt. You think screwing with me is fun? I shook my head frantically, taking a step toward him, my hand outstretched, but he recoiled as if I had burned him. With a sudden, violent motion, he hurled the wildflowers to the ground, the bright petals scattering across the dirty pavement. The cake followed, hitting the concrete with a sickening splat, a messy explosion of cream and strawberries. Forget it, he spat, his voice laced with venom as he turned his back on me. Just forget it. He stormed off, his furious footsteps echoing down the alley, leaving me alone with the wreckage of his birthday. I stood there, frozen, staring at the sugary ruin at my feet. My throat burned, not from the strain of speaking, but from all the words I still couldn't say. I wanted to run after him, to explain that it was never a game, but what was the point? The damage was done. That night, the summer, which had felt so full of promise, was over. And so were we. 7 years can erase a person and build a new one in their place. At 25, the scrawny, ambiguous teenager was gone. College had filled me out, adding inches to my height and a subtle breadth to my shoulders. My features had sharpened, losing their softness. No one mistook me for a girl anymore. At the tech firm where I worked as a programmer, I had earned a reputation as soft-spoken and the nice guy. I didn't mind. In the cutthroat world of office politics, being underestimated was a quiet advantage. I kept my head down, wrote my code, and did my best to keep the ghosts of the past buried. Of course, ghosts rarely stay buried. It was a Thursday when the whispers began. A month prior, our CEO had announced the hiring of a new marketing manager. I hadn't paid much attention. New executives were a common occurrence, and I was drowning in deadlines. But now, with his arrival imminent, the office gossip mill was in overdrive. He's supposedly a genius, Sarah, an analyst from the next cubicle, whispered over lunch. And a total catch. I saw his LinkedIn photo. I offered a polite, non-committal nod, my attention fixed on my phone. Hot or not, it made no difference to my life. Until the day he walked into the conference room. The room was buzzing with anticipation. I was doodling on my notepad, only half listening to the CEO's introductory remarks, when a voice cut through the chatter. A voice that hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dennis Carter, your new marketing manager. My pen froze on the page. I slowly lifted my head, and my world tilted on its axis. There he was, Dennis, standing at the front of the room, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that screamed success. His hair was no longer a chaotic mess but was styled with precision. His grin was still there, but now it was polished, confident, a world away from the scruffy, reckless boy I remembered. But it was him. Those eyes, I would know them anywhere. My heart performed a frantic, painful lurch, caught somewhere between stopping entirely and beating its way out of my chest. His gaze swept across the room, a brief, professional assessment of his new team, and passed right over me without a flicker of recognition. I sank lower in my chair, a ridiculous wish to become invisible washing over me. How had I not seen this coming? Dennis, here, in my office, the boy who had called me Little Mute, who had shattered a birthday cake and a piece of my heart in a dark alley. Did he even remember that boy? The meeting became a blur. His voice, a low, confident hum, filled the room, but I couldn't process the words. He spoke of market strategies, engagement metrics, and corporate synergy, but all I could hear was the echo of him calling my nickname. All I could see was the flash of anger in his eyes as he walked away. When the meeting finally concluded, I bolted from my chair, slipping out the door before the crowd could swarm him with handshakes and introductions. I couldn't face him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The following weeks were a special kind of torture. Dennis was a force of nature, a whirlwind of charisma and competence. He was everywhere. Leading presentations, cracking jokes with colleagues, commanding attention in every room he entered. He was brilliant at his job, a natural leader. The women in the office were utterly captivated, and even the men were won over by his easy charm. And me? I became an expert in avoidance. I learned his schedule, the paths he took through the office, the times he frequented the break room. He hadn't spoken a single word to me, hadn't even met my eye. I told myself it was for the best. He had forgotten. I was just a fleeting, embarrassing memory from his youth, if I was a memory at all. But it stung. Every time we passed in the hallway and his gaze slid over me as if I were a piece of furniture, a small, irrational part of me ached. One afternoon, I was stirring sugar into my coffee in the break room when Sarah and another coworker, Mia, cornered me. "Jonathan, have you picked your nickname for the team-building retreat yet?" Sarah asked, leaning against the counter. The company had a cringe-worthy tradition of assigning goofy aliases for these mandatory bonding events. I shrugged. "Haven't really thought about it." "You have to pick something," Mia insisted. "They're finalizing the list by the end of the day." I know, I groaned. "I'm drawing a complete blank." "Will help," Sarah declared with a grin. "Something cute to match your personality. Like Sunshine or Smiley." I rolled my eyes, about to protest, when a voice cut in from behind me, cool and detached. "Call him Trickster." I froze, my hand still holding the spoon. Dennis was standing at the coffee machine, his back to us. His tone was casual, almost bored, but the word itself was a razor blade. Sarah frowned. "Trickster? That's so random. It doesn't fit Jonathan at all." Dennis didn't turn around. He just stirred his own coffee with a slow, deliberate motion. "Suits him more than you think." And with that, he walked out of the room, not sparing me a single glance. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. Trickster. A liar. A deceiver. He remembered. Of course, he remembered. And 7 years hadn't been long enough to extinguish his anger. "What was that about?" Mia asked, exchanging a confused look with Sarah. I forced a tight smile, the coffee in my hand suddenly tasting like ash. "No idea. He's probably just being weird." But I knew. I knew exactly what he meant. In mythology, tricksters were cunning and deceptive figures. Like me 7 years ago, letting him believe I was someone I wasn't. He hadn't forgotten me. He just hated me too much to even acknowledge my existence. That night, I lay awake, the word trickster echoing in the darkness. The worst part of it all was the traitorous hope that still flickered within me. The hope that one day he would look at me and see me, just once, the way he used to. The team-building retreat was a nightmare of forced enthusiasm and awkward icebreakers at a lakeside resort. I had planned to fade into the background, a quiet observer on the periphery. But Dennis, it seemed, had other ideas. The morning was filled with mostly harmless activities, and I successfully managed to keep my distance, watching as he effortlessly charmed everyone, flipping burgers at the barbecue with an easy confidence that was both impressive and infuriating. The afternoon's main event was a water rafting race. We were divided into teams of 6, tasked with paddling flimsy bamboo rafts across the lake. Dennis, naturally, was a team captain. He stood at the front, calling out the goofy nicknames from a list projected onto a large screen. I held my breath, praying he would skip over mine. But then he paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned the list. My stomach plummeted. "Gray Rabbit," he said, his voice flat, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. A murmur went through the crowd. "Gray Rabbit? Who's Gray Rabbit?" Mia whispered, nudging me. With a heavy sigh, I raised my hand. I trudged forward, feeling the weight of everyone's curious stares. Dennis didn't meet my eyes. He just gave a curt nod, as if I were just another name on a list. Gray Rabbit. Another jab. Rabbits in folklore were often tricksters. He was enjoying this. The race was pure chaos. Our raft tipped precariously with every wave, and Dennis transformed into a drill sergeant, barking orders. "Paddle harder, Gray Rabbit," he yelled over the splashing water. I gritted my teeth and dug my paddle in deeper, fueled by a stubborn refusal to appear weak in front of him. We won, of course, largely due to his relentless drive. As our team cheered, I hung back, soaked and exhausted. And then I slipped. The dock was slick with algae. My foot slid out from under me, and I flailed, bracing for impact. Suddenly, a strong hand shot out, grabbing my waist and yanking me back to my feet. I looked up, startled, to find myself inches from Dennis's face, his grip firm and steady. "Careful," he muttered, his voice low and unexpectedly rough. My heart did a stupid, traitorous flip. "Thanks," I mumbled, pulling away as quickly as I could. He let me go, but not before I caught a strange, unreadable expression in his eyes. Was it concern? Or just annoyance? "Your pants are soaked," he stated, his gaze dropping to my dripping jeans. "I've got spares in my car. Come on." He was already walking away, not waiting for a response. The spare jeans he tossed me fit surprisingly well, a detail that my overthinking brain latched onto. A week later, the universe decided to test my sanity further. 7 of us were sent on a business trip, crammed into a budget hotel with a rooming mishap. I was assigned to share a room with Tom, a friendly colleague who was openly gay. I thought nothing of it. But barely an hour after we checked in, there was a knock on our door. It was Dennis. "I'm switching with you," he announced to a baffled Tom. You sure, boss?" Tom asked. "You've got a single." "This is not that." Dennis's excuse was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. "The room number here is 8. It's a lucky number. Big project coming up, can't jinx it." Tom just shrugged and left, leaving me alone with Dennis as he hauled his suitcase into our tiny room. Lucky number? What game was he playing? The room was cramped, with 2 narrow beds and a bathroom that made me question my career choices. The shower stall was enclosed by a single, completely transparent pane of glass. No curtain, no frosted section, nothing. I stared at it in horror as Dennis calmly set up his laptop. "You washing up first?" he asked, not looking up. I nodded mutely, grabbing my towel. Inside the bathroom, I could see his clear silhouette through the glass. This was a certifiable nightmare. I was debating whether to just sleep in my travel clothes when he glanced up from his screen. "Something wrong?" he called out. No," I squeaked. He frowned, then stood up, grabbing his jacket. "I'm starving. Going to grab some food. Want anything?" "No, I'm good," I said far too quickly. He left, and I took the fastest, most paranoid shower of my life. The rest of the night passed in a thick, uncomfortable silence. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Why had he switched rooms? Why did the spare pants fit? If he hated me so much, why was he constantly engineering situations that forced us together? Dennis Carter was no longer the straightforward boy from the alley. He was an infuriating puzzle, and God help me, I wanted to solve it. The business trip ended, but Dennis's perplexing behavior did not. It escalated. He started driving me home after we worked late, something that was happening with increasing frequency. His car would be waiting by the curb as I trudged toward the subway station. "Hop in, Gray Rabbit," he'd say, his tone casual, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. My protests were always met with a stubborn insistence that it was on his way, even though I knew for a fact that his apartment was in the opposite direction. Those rides were initially filled with a heavy, charged silence, broken only by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers on rainy nights. I would stare out the passenger window, hyper-aware of his presence beside me. The way his hands gripped the steering wheel, the faint, clean scent of his cologne. We never spoke of the past. It was an unspoken truce, a fragile agreement to pretend that summer never happened. But it was always there, a tangible entity in the small space between us. Then I got sick. It began as a dull ache in my abdomen, which I dismissed as stress. But by Thursday, the ache had intensified into a sharp, stabbing pain. I sat at my desk, slick with a cold sweat, clutching my side. "Jonathan, are you okay?" Sarah asked, her voice laced with concern. "You look awful." I tried to answer, but the pain stole my breath. "What's wrong?" Dennis's voice cut through the fog of pain. He was suddenly beside me, his usual cool demeanor replaced with a sharp urgency. He didn't wait for an explanation. "Come on. I'm taking you to the hospital." I tried to wave him off, but he was already pulling me to my feet, his grip firm but surprisingly gentle. "Don't argue," he said, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. Dennis took charge of everything, from filling out the paperwork to fetching my prescriptions. He barely spoke, his jaw tight with a tension I couldn't decipher, but he never left my side. As we finally sat in the waiting area, I noticed his shirt was damp with sweat from his frantic running around. "Feeling better?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "Thanks, Dennis." It was the first time I had said his name to him in 7 years. He just grunted in response, looking away. He insisted on driving me home. At my apartment door, I fumbled for the right words. Thanks again. You really didn't have to do all that. He cut me off. Are you going to eat tonight? I shrugged, the thought of food making me nauseous. He frowned. Can I come in? Just for a glass of water. I was too surprised to refuse. Inside, he bypassed the sink and went straight to my fridge, his frown deepening as he surveyed its sad, empty contents. You're hopeless, he muttered, before pulling out the only pot I owned. I'm making you porridge. You don't have to. I started to protest, but he shot me a look that clearly said shut up and sit down. So I did. I watched, dumbfounded, as he expertly chopped carrots and ginger, his movements precise and focused. The porridge he made was simple, but it was the most comforting thing I had ever tasted. This is really good, I admitted. He smirked, leaning against my kitchen counter. Yeah, well, I'm not just a pretty face. I snorted, and for a fleeting second, it felt like old times. But the weight of 7 unspoken years was still between us, and I couldn't bear it any longer. Dennis, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Are you still mad? About back then? His smirk vanished. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time since he'd walked back into my life. You think I'm mad? I nodded, my chest tight. I never meant to trick you. I couldn't talk. He closed the distance between us in 2 quick strides. I'm not mad, Jonathan, he said, his voice raw. I was messed up. I was pissed, yeah, but mostly because I felt like a complete idiot. And then, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Took me 4 years to track you down. And when I finally did, I was too much of a coward to say anything. I thought you'd hate me. My jaw dropped. You tracked me down? He nodded, a sheepish look on his face. Why do you think I took this job? I found out you worked here. I figured it was my only shot. I stared at him, my mind reeling. All this time, I thought he despised me, but he had been searching for me? I waited for you, I blurted out, my face burning. Every summer during college. I went back to that alley hoping you'd be there. His eyes widened. A soft, disbelieving laugh escaped his lips. We're idiots, aren't we? A month later, on my birthday, I woke up to a text from him. Happy birthday, Gray Rabbit. Moments later, there was a knock on my door. It was Dennis holding a cake, a perfect strawberry cake, and a bag of groceries. He cooked me dinner, and as we sat in my small living room, the air thick with everything we hadn't said, I finally had to ask, Dennis, why are you doing all of this? He set down his fork, his gaze locking with mine. Because I like you, Jonathan. I think I always have. He moved closer until I was backed against the wall. I'm a mess, he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. I was too proud to apologize back then, and too scared you'd hate me now. But I'm done running. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, vulnerable, and full of a hope that mirrored my own. Can I chase you? Properly this time? And so, after 7 years of silence, misunderstandings, and a world of hurt, we were finally back where we started, in a small room, with a birthday cake and a question hanging in the air that held the promise of a new beginning. What do you think Jonathan should say? Do you believe in second chances like this, even after so much time has passed? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you love this story and want to see how it unfolds, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more.